Sergeant Ethan Cole sat in the dimly lit command tent, staring at the screen in front of him. The battle had been long, and he was exhausted. His body ached, his muscles sore from days of fighting on the front lines. But this was what he did. He was a soldier, and he knew there was no end to the war. His eyes flickered to the notification that popped up on his tablet. He sighed, expecting more orders. But when he saw the message, his heart skipped a beat. It was from his lawyer. Sergeant Ethan Cole, you have inherited the estate of your late uncle, Zane Cole. Please report to the estate office in the Varus system for further details. He blinked in confusion. His uncle. The same uncle he hadn't seen or heard from in years. The same uncle who had cut him off after a family disagreement. Ethan's mind raced. What did his uncle have to leave him? And why now? Curiosity gnawed at him, but there was no time to think about it. The war continued. He set the tablet aside and turned his focus back to the mission ahead. Still, the message lingered in the back of his mind. After the mission ended, Ethan gathered his things and made his way to the ship that would take him to the Varus system. He wasn't sure what he was walking into, but his life was about to change in ways he didn't expect. As the ship jumped into hyperspace, Ethan settled into a seat, staring out of the small porthole. The stars streaked by as he thought about the inheritance, the family business, the wealth. He had never been interested in money. As a soldier, his life had always been about honor and duty, not luxury. But something about this inheritance felt different. His uncle had been wealthy, no doubt about that. The message mentioned an estate, assets, and properties across several planets. The ship's AI chimed in with a soft voice. Approaching Varus system. Estimated arrival in 2 hours. Ethan leaned back in his seat, rubbing his hands over his face. He wasn't sure what to expect. His uncle had been a mysterious figure in his life, and now that he was gone, Ethan didn't know if he should feel grateful for the inheritance or suspicious of it. As the ship neared its destination, the systems came to life with the usual checks and warnings. Ethan's mind drifted to his uncle's legacy. The man had lived a life of exploration and wealth, an empire built through connections, adventure, and savvy deals. But Ethan had never been part of that world. The thought of stepping into it felt both exciting and overwhelming. The ship landed on the sprawling grounds of the estate, and as Ethan disembarked, he was met by a team of lawyers and a few other unfamiliar faces. One person stood out from the crowd, a tall, striking alien woman with golden eyes, her presence commanding the attention of everyone around her. She stepped forward, and her gaze locked onto Ethan with an intensity that took him by surprise. She didn't speak, but her silent presence felt like an unspoken challenge. Ethan stood still, trying to process the sight of the striking alien woman who had just stepped forward. Her golden eyes seemed to pierce right through him, and her presence felt almost otherworldly. She wore a sleek, fitted outfit that was both elegant and practical, and the way she carried herself spoke of authority. "Welcome, Sergeant Ethan Cole," she said, her voice smooth and commanding, with a faint accent that was both unfamiliar and captivating. "I am Liana, your uncle's companion." Ethan blinked, unsure of what to say. His uncle had always been distant, and now this woman, his companion, as she put it, was standing before him, seemingly as much a part of the inheritance as the estate itself. Thank you," Ethan managed, though the words felt out of place. He had expected lawyers, maybe distant relatives, but not an alien woman with such an intense gaze. Liana's eyes softened slightly, sensing his discomfort. "I understand that this is a lot to take in," she said, offering him a small smile. "Your uncle was a complex man, but his wishes were clear, and I am bound to fulfill them." Ethan nodded, still trying to process what was happening. His uncle's will had come with a strange condition. Not only had he inherited the vast fortune, but Liana was part of the deal. She was, as his uncle had left it, a companion, and now was to be placed under Ethan's care, or so it seemed. But there was something about her that made Ethan uneasy, something he couldn't put his finger on. Your uncle's estate is more than just wealth, Liana continued, her voice steady. It's an empire of connections, businesses, and influence across several planets. I've been handling many of his affairs, but now it's time for you to step in, Sergeant. Ethan looked around, noticing the sleek buildings, the vast grounds, and the impressive array of advanced technology that surrounded him. It was overwhelming, to say the least. He had come here expecting to claim a fortune, but instead, it felt like he had walked into a world far beyond anything he had imagined. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this, Ethan admitted, frustration creeping into his voice. I'm just a soldier. I don't know anything about any of this. Liana regarded him for a moment, her golden eyes thoughtful. Your uncle believed you had the strength to lead, Ethan. That's why he left it to you. It's not about wealth. It's about the power to shape the future. For your people and others. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, his mind racing. The idea of leading an empire of this size was as foreign to him as the alien world he stood on. He had spent his life on the battlefield, not in boardrooms or corporate offices. Liana placed a hand gently on his arm, her touch unexpectedly warm. You don't have to do this alone, she said, her voice softer. I'm here to help you. Together, we can make this work. Ethan looked at her, his heart beating a little faster. There was something about her, something that made him feel both uneasy and intrigued. All right, he said finally. Let's figure this out, together. Liana gave him a small, encouraging smile. Good. We begin tomorrow. There is much to do. As she turned to lead him further into the estate, Ethan felt the weight of his new responsibility settling on his shoulders. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was ready to face it alone. The next morning, Ethan woke early, the weight of the previous day's revelations still fresh in his mind. The estate was quiet, almost eerily so, with large windows that looked out onto the expansive grounds. He had been handed a fortune, an empire, and a woman who was just as much a part of the inheritance as the business itself. Ethan stood by the window, his thoughts racing. How was he supposed to manage all this? He had spent his life fighting on the front lines, not running businesses or dealing with complex politics. The idea of taking over his uncle's empire felt more like a burden than an opportunity. A soft knock on the door broke his train of thought. Come in, Ethan called, turning toward the door. Liana entered, her presence as commanding as it had been the day before. She was dressed in a sleek black outfit that accentuated her grace and poise. There was a quiet strength in the way she moved, a calm that contrasted sharply with Ethan's anxiety. Good morning, Sergeant Cole, she said, her tone polite but firm. I hope you're ready to start. Ethan gave a small nod, trying to shake off the nervousness in his chest. I guess I don't have much of a choice. Liana smiled faintly. No, you don't. But don't worry. I'll be here to guide you through it. We start with a tour of the estate and an overview of the businesses your uncle ran. After that, we'll discuss your next steps. All right, Ethan said, though he still wasn't sure he was prepared for any of it. Lead the way. They walked through the grand halls of the estate, past elegant rooms and sophisticated technology. The place was vast, far larger than anything Ethan had ever imagined. It was more like a palace than a home, with walls adorned with artwork from every corner of the galaxy. His uncle's wealth had been astronomical, and it was all there for Ethan to manage. Liana explained the key parts of the empire: mining operations on distant moons, transportation fleets that connected planets, and technology firms that were at the cutting edge of innovation. Ethan listened closely, trying to absorb everything, but it was a lot to take in. His mind kept drifting to how this was all so different from the life he knew. As they walked through a high-tech conference room, Liana paused. This is where most of the decisions are made, she said. Your uncle often worked from here, holding meetings with leaders from all over the galaxy. The power of this empire lies in its connections, and you'll need to maintain them. Ethan glanced around the room. It was filled with sleek glass tables, holographic displays, and chairs designed for comfort. He could imagine his uncle sitting here, making deals and calling shots. But now it was his turn. "I've never done anything like this," Ethan admitted, feeling a wave of uncertainty wash over him. "I don't know how to run an empire." Lyanna turned to him, her golden eyes softening. "You don't have to do it alone. That's why I'm here. I'll help you learn what you need to know." Her reassurance, though simple, brought a sense of calm. Ethan looked at her, realizing that perhaps he wasn't as alone as he had thought. She was more than just a companion. She was a guide. And maybe, just maybe, this partnership would work. Ethan sat in the conference room, his hands resting on the polished table, eyes scanning the holographic documents Lyanna had just projected in front of him. The weight of his new role was beginning to sink in. The business dealings, the political alliances, the rival factions, all of it felt like a storm he was trying to hold back with his bare hands. He was a soldier, not a businessman. Lyanna stood beside him, pointing at various sections of the display. "This is the mining operation on Tanary 6. It's one of the most profitable ventures your uncle had. We've been in a strong partnership with the Shiraxi Mining Guild for years. They are loyal, but we need to ensure the contracts are renewed next quarter." Ethan nodded, but his mind wandered. He'd spent so much of his life focused on survival, on missions, on battles, that he had never thought about contracts or resource management. This felt like a whole new world. "You're quiet," Lyanna observed, turning to him with a raised eyebrow. "Are you overwhelmed?" Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's a lot to take in. I'm not used to this world. I've been living in chaos, not boardrooms." Lyanna gave a soft laugh, her golden eyes twinkling. "Most people who inherit fortunes aren't prepared, but that's why I'm here. To help you understand it all." He looked at her, taking in her calm demeanor and how easily she navigated this alien world. "I'm glad you're here," he said, his voice a little more sincere than he expected. "I wouldn't be able to do this without you." Lyanna's expression softened, her gaze gentle. "You can do this, Ethan, and you'll have me by your side. Your uncle trusted you for a reason. We're a team now." Her words felt like a lifeline in the overwhelming sea of responsibility he was trying to stay afloat in. As much as he didn't want to admit it, the idea of not having Lyanna with him made everything seem even more impossible. "All right," Ethan said, sitting up straighter. "Let's focus. What's next?" Lyanna flipped through the holographic display, showing him another part of the empire. An advanced technology company that developed cutting-edge weapons and AI systems. "This is the most delicate part of the inheritance. The company is successful, but it has many enemies. You'll need to make sure the contracts are renewed, and that the technology doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Ethan frowned. "I can deal with enemies. I've fought wars before, but weapons, AI, that's a whole new level." Lyanna gave him a reassuring smile. "Yes, it is. But we'll take it step by step. I'll guide you through the negotiations. We'll make sure the right people are in place to protect this part of the empire." Ethan nodded, though doubt still lingered in the back of his mind. He had survived battlefields and dangerous missions, but this world of politics, wealth, and alliances was a different kind of war. Still, as he glanced at Lyanna, standing next to him with confidence, he knew that he wasn't in this alone. She was a part of his inheritance, yes, but also a partner he could trust. Together, they might just have a chance to make it work. The days following Ethan's deeper involvement in managing his uncle's empire passed in a blur of meetings, decisions, and unexpected challenges. Lyanna was always there, guiding him, translating the complex world of business and politics into something he could understand. With her help, he slowly started to feel more confident, though the weight of responsibility still pressed down on him. One morning, as Ethan stood on the balcony of his uncle's estate, staring out at the sprawling landscape, Lyanna joined him, her presence as quiet and steady as ever. "You look deep in thought," she said, her voice calm but perceptive. Ethan didn't turn to look at her. "I'm trying to wrap my head around all this," he said, gesturing toward the estate. "It's overwhelming. There are so many moving parts, and I'm just one person." Liana stepped beside him, her gaze following his. "You're not alone in this, Ethan. I'm here, and so are the people your uncle trusted. We'll help you every step of the way. You don't have to carry it all by yourself." Ethan glanced at her, his expression mixed with frustration and appreciation. "It's not just that. It's everything. The deals, the rival companies, the enemies, and now, the political stuff. My uncle was part of a bigger game than I realized. I'm just a soldier. I'm not cut out for this." Liana placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "That's where you're wrong," she said, her tone firm. "You've been in the middle of battles before, physical and mental. This is just a different kind of fight. And in your own way, you're already proving that you can handle it." Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I don't know. I feel like I'm always one step behind. Like I'm trying to catch up to something I didn't ask for." Liana smiled faintly. "You didn't ask for this life, but you're the one who's meant to lead it now. Your uncle saw something in you, Ethan. I believe in you too." He turned to look at her, meeting her steady golden eyes. Her words gave him a small spark of hope, a feeling he hadn't expected. Despite the pressure, despite the fear, Ethan realized that maybe, just maybe, he could do this. With Liana by his side, he wasn't alone in the battle. "I don't know if I'm ready for all this," Ethan admitted, his voice quiet. "But I'll try. For my uncle, for you, and for everyone who's relying on me." Liana nodded, her gaze softening. That's all anyone can ask for. As the day wore on, Ethan found himself facing a series of difficult decisions. Deals to negotiate, alliances to secure, and enemies to contend with. But for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose beyond just surviving the day. There was something bigger at stake now, something he had to protect, not just the Empire, but the people who had become part of his world. With Liana's guidance and his own growing resolve, Ethan took the first steps toward making his uncle's legacy his own. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, contracts, and alliances. Ethan had been thrown into the deep end of a world he never thought he'd be a part of. But with Liana's help, he slowly started to navigate through the complexities of his uncle's empire. Each day, he grew more confident, though there were moments when the pressure almost became too much. One morning, after a long night of paperwork and strategy sessions, Ethan stood in front of the large windows of the estate, looking out at the expansive land. His mind was tired, his body sore from the constant strain of trying to keep up with everything. But there was a growing feeling of responsibility inside him. This was no longer just about wealth or power. It was about keeping everything together. Liana entered the room, her presence quiet but commanding as always. She studied him for a moment before speaking. "You're doing well," she said, her voice calm. "But you need rest, Ethan. You can't keep going at this pace." Ethan turned to face her, rubbing his eyes. "I don't have the luxury of rest. There are deals to finalize, contracts to sign, enemies to deal with. I can't afford to let anything slip." Liana walked closer, her golden eyes steady. "You're learning, and you're doing it fast. But you're still human. Even the best leaders need time to breathe. Let me handle some of the details for today. You've earned a break." Ethan hesitated, his instincts telling him to keep pushing. But as he looked at her, at how calm she seemed amidst all the chaos, he realized she was right. He needed to step back, if only for a moment. "All right," he said finally, his shoulders relaxing. "I'll take a break, but only for a few hours." Liana smiled, a hint of warmth in her expression. "That's all I ask. You'll be better for it." After taking a short break, Ethan decided to take a walk through the estate grounds. The air was crisp, and the early morning sun cast long shadows across the fields. It was quiet here, away from the demands of the empire. He needed this moment of peace to clear his mind. As he walked, he thought about how much his life had changed. A few months ago, he had been just another soldier, following orders on distant battlefields. Now he was responsible for an empire, one he never asked for, but one he couldn't afford to lose. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice calling his name. Ethan. He turned to see Lyanna approaching, her steps light on the grass. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze thoughtful. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady but serious. "There are those who won't accept your leadership, no matter what we do. Your uncle's enemies are still out there, and some of them are more dangerous than we realize." Ethan nodded, his mind instantly shifting back to the challenges ahead. "What do you suggest?" "We take the offensive," Lyanna said, her golden eyes sharp. "We need to make sure they know who's in charge now. You're not just inheriting his wealth. You're inheriting his legacy. It's time to prove you're more than just a soldier." Ethan's eyes met hers, his resolve strengthening. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. "Let's do it." The following days were a blur of action. Ethan and Lyanna worked side by side, strategizing and executing plans to strengthen Ethan's position in the empire. They knew their enemies were waiting for a weakness, hoping Ethan would falter. But with each step, they made sure they were one move ahead. Ethan had quickly learned that leadership wasn't just about managing wealth. It was about power, influence, and securing loyalty, and he was determined to prove he was capable of all of it. One morning, as Ethan was reviewing reports in his office, Lyanna walked in with a new challenge. "There's a meeting scheduled with the Shiraxi Mining Guild today," she said, her voice calm. "They're one of our strongest allies, but there's tension in the air. I sensed it. They want more from us, and they might be testing your resolve." Ethan straightened in his chair, focusing on her. "More? What do they want?" "They've been asking for more control over some of the mining operations on Tanary 6, Lyanna explained. "They know the planet's resources are valuable, and they want a bigger share. If we refuse, they might turn against us." Ethan thought for a moment, rubbing his chin. "So, it's a power play." Lyanna nodded. "Exactly. They're trying to gauge whether you'll back down or stand your ground." Ethan stood, looking out the large window of his office. His mind raced. He had learned quickly that this world, his uncle's empire, was about more than just making deals. It was about making the right impression, showing strength, and sometimes making decisions that didn't sit well with everyone. "I won't back down," Ethan said finally, turning to Lyanna. "We'll go into that meeting, and I'll make it clear that I'm in charge." Lyanna gave him a small, approving smile. "I knew you would. But remember, Ethan, diplomacy is as important as strength. Don't let pride cloud your judgment." The meeting was set in one of the largest conference halls of the estate. When Ethan and Lyanna entered, the Shiraxi Guild representatives were already waiting, their towering figures standing as a silent reminder of their power. The leader of the guild, a massive alien named Kareth, nodded as they entered. "Sergeant Cole," Kareth rumbled, his voice deep. "I hear you are now in charge of your uncle's empire. It's a new era." Then, Ethan met Kareth's gaze steadily. "It is, and I intend to ensure it thrives." Kareth's golden eyes narrowed slightly. "We've done well under your uncle's leadership, but we're seeking more. We want an increase in our share of Tanary 6 resources. It's time for us to have a bigger role in this empire." Ethan paused, considering the request. The power in the room was shifting. He could feel the weight of his decision. He looked at Lyanna, who gave him a subtle nod, signaling her trust in his judgment. "I understand your position," Ethan said finally, his voice steady. "But I will not give away more than what is fair. You want more power. Then you will need to earn it by proving your loyalty, not by demanding it." The room fell silent. Kareth studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. But then, slowly, the alien leader nodded. "Very well, Sergeant Cole. We will consider your terms. But know this is a test. We'll be watching." Ethan nodded back, holding his ground. "And I'll be watching you, Kareth. We'll both know where we stand." As the meeting concluded, Ethan felt a surge of confidence. It wasn't just about the decision he'd made. It was about showing that he wasn't just some heir to an empire. He was a leader in his own right. Ethan leaned back in his chair after the meeting with the Shiraxi Mining Guild, the weight of the conversation still pressing on him. He had stood his ground, but the tension in the air was palpable. The guild had agreed to his terms, but the challenge wasn't over. They had made it clear they would be watching closely. Liana entered the room, her expression unreadable as she closed the door behind her. Ethan could see the approval in her eyes, but also something more. Caution. "You did well," she said softly, walking over to the table where he had been reviewing documents. "They're not easy to deal with." Ethan nodded, but his thoughts were already moving ahead. "They won't be the last to test me," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this. Running everything, managing all these alliances, enemies at every corner. It's a lot to juggle." Liana sat across from him, her golden eyes steady and understanding. "You're doing better than most would. You've faced battles, Ethan. This is just a different kind of fight. It's about knowing when to push, when to negotiate, and when to show strength." Ethan looked at her, his gaze softening. "I couldn't do it without you. You've helped me more than you know." A faint smile touched Liana's lips. "You're learning quickly. Your uncle saw that in you, and I believe it too. But you must trust yourself, just as much as you trust me." Ethan sat back in his chair, absorbing her words. He had never thought of himself as a leader. Back on the battlefield, his role had been clear: fight, survive, protect his team. But here, in this world of wealth, power, and politics, he was constantly second-guessing himself. Yet, with Liana by his side, he started to feel like he was capable of more than he ever imagined. As he stood up, he glanced at the display on the wall, reports, updates, and new challenges all flashing before him. His life had changed in ways he couldn't have predicted, and it felt like the world was now in his hands. But it was a world that came with its own set of dangers, and he wasn't naive enough to think it would be easy. "We're not done yet," Ethan said, his voice steady. "The Shiraxi are one thing, but I know there are others watching, waiting for me to slip up. I need to make sure this empire doesn't fall apart." Liana stood as well, walking over to stand beside him. "And it won't. Not as long as you keep your focus. But remember, this isn't just about protecting the empire. It's about what you want for it. Your vision. You're not just a soldier anymore, Ethan. You're the one shaping the future." His eyes met hers, and for the first time, he saw it clearly: the weight of the responsibility he had taken on, but also the potential to build something that could change everything. "I think I'm starting to get it," he said, his voice firmer than before. "Let's make it work, together." Liana smiled, her golden eyes filled with trust. "Together."